This episode includes conversations about childbirth. Some listeners may find them upsetting.
Welcome to Real Women's Stories. In this episode, we explore motherhood. And is it rewarding?
It's very hard when your dreams aren't what they would seem.
I'm Lisa Quait, and I'm a mum to 3 crazy kids who I love with all my heart. However, our house is full of doors slamming, arguments going on. I was actually having an argument with one of my daughters this week, and I screamed at her and went, "You don't realise how hard it is being a mum to you too." I've always sat with my friends and had a good old natter over a cup of coffee, putting the world to rights. And now I'm using this podcast to have those conversations right here.
I'm going to get quite emotional now. But, yeah,
Take your time. Take your time. This is Real Women's Stories. In this episode today, we ask ourselves, motherhood, is it rewarding? And I am interviewing Emily Whalley. Now, Emily is a sleep and feeding coach. She helps parents who have just given birth to newborn babies and infants, and they're struggling with their eating and their feeding habits. And Emily runs a practice called Fox and the Moon, which is extremely helpful to all you new parents. Is motherhood rewarding? Let's find out.
As a little girl, ask any kind of close member of my family, I was the most maternal little girl, like wanted to take care of family friends' babies and, cousins' babies. And I wasn't into kind of Barbies and Polly Pockets. It was all about the baby dolls, and I'd breastfeed them. And I thought I was born to be a mum. The journey that I had in becoming a mom and then being a mom was a lot tougher than I expected. And my journey was probably a little bit, it was different. It's very hard when your dreams aren't what they would seem.
Sure. So you're saying that, I guess, and I think that's pretty fair to say, most women before they have children do have a certain expectation. They do want it, I guess we've grown up in fairy tales, haven't we? We've watched the cartoons, we've watched all these love stories, and we think, well, it's just another extension of that love story. And so that love story is just going to be magic and rainbows and unicorns and all those kind of things. And then when baby comes along, which we're not prepared for, are we? Because we go to the antenatal classes and we're taught certain things, but suddenly you have this life in your hands.
Nobody can prepare you for how you're going to feel. And there is a fine kind of line of scaremongering, which is not what we want to do to any pregnant mother, and education and support and reassurance. And people can say to you, this is a massive commitment, which we all know that. We all know it's a life-changing, massive commitment. And if you don't think that, then you definitely shouldn't be having children. There's no words, there's nothing anyone can say that's going to prepare you for your unique journey. And we romanticize it. We have to, that's how the world continues to populate. If we didn't have those romantic ideas of co-creating people and enjoying that time, then we'd be in trouble.
So then talk me through what happened to you.
Fell pregnant very quickly after deciding to try for a baby with Arthur. Arthur's my child. And in hindsight, looking back at that time, I very much hyper-focused on the pregnancy and what I could do to have some control over my life and my body. And I read, everything there was to read about pregnancy and birth. And I knew that I wanted to breastfeed, and I knew what birth I wanted. And there was no question about that going wrong. It wasn't going to go wrong. And that was it. I've done a hypnobirthing class. I know how to advocate for myself. And I won't be induced, and I won't end up with any kind of traumatic delivery. I got to 42 weeks pregnant with Arthur. I had SPD, which is where your pelvis separates slightly due to the relaxin hormone that we all produce when we're pregnant, and that enables our muscles and joints to relax. So I was in a hell of a lot of pain, and I asked for expected management. So that's when you go overdue, you can request to go into hospital and be monitored and scanned to make sure everything's okay with the baby. And I'd gone into my second day of expected management, really determined to let this baby come naturally. And two midwives walked in and they said, do you know that you're putting your baby at risk of stillbirth if you carry on doing this? We want to get you induced. And I panicked and was very scared and frightened, and I said, okay, let's do induction. But essentially I was in labour for 48 hours, got to 5 centimetres dilated. Arthur was in distress, and was rushed for an emergency cesarean section. The birth itself was very traumatic, and because of how anxious I was, it was then 5 nights in hospital for observations where I didn't sleep at all, and was really struggling to feed him. And I actually went on to develop postnatal psychosis from sleep deprivation. I just kind of felt like this is all I ever wanted. And I almost felt like I was doing this to myself. Like my brain was punishing me for kind of having this experience. There was elements of depression, but mostly with Arthur, for the first 2-3 years at least, it was intense anxiety that manifested in quite a few different behaviors, I guess, in me trying to control that. But it was anxiety. And I remember saying, like, I wasn't expected to feel this amount of love, and I don't know what to do with that. And I think for a lot of women, that love, that overwhelming feeling, can manifest in anxiety and these intrusive thoughts. And again, I say intrusive thoughts like it's, you know, a flippant comment. And if mums, new mums especially, understood how common and how normal it is to have those intrusive thoughts about the caring of your baby, and it's things like, oh my God, what would happen if I fell down the stairs now while you're carrying them? Or what would happen if I just turned the wheel now? Or what would happen if I walked over this bridge with the pram and it broke? Or, you know, they're very, very normal thoughts to be having. And obviously if they're affecting your everyday life and they're happening every minute of every day, that's not okay. It was just a very, very traumatic time. I remember vividly standing at my bedroom window and looking, I mean, I hope they didn't see me, but looking across to my neighbours, and they were sat eating a meal, this couple were sat eating a meal, and I just thought to myself, I'm never going to be able to do that again. I'm never going to be able to sit and eat a meal.
Yeah, how did you overcome that to then go, right, I'm ready to have number 2 now, because you've been through all of these experiences? Do you, in your mind, was it, oh, okay, now I feel like I've kind of worked this out. Number 2 is going to be okay because I've gone through all of this and it can't get any worse?
There was definitely elements of that. I never wanted to stop at 1 child. I always wanted 2 children. But for a long time I thought, well, that's not, I can't do that. I can't do that to myself, and I can't do that to my, you know, my son, my toddler, or the family around me. I kind of thought, do you know, nothing will be as bad as that. I know a lot more now. It's going to be fine, but I will self-refer to antenatal psychiatry. I'll be under their team. I'll do everything that I can to prevent any of those feelings happening again and gain some control. So before my second son was even conceived, I knew that I wanted to have a planned C-section this time. I didn't want any chance of anything going wrong. I just wanted a planned C-section. And my team and, you know, my perinatal psychiatric team, my midwifery team, when I fell pregnant with Henry, were unbelievable in kind of putting those things in place for me. I was very calm when pregnant with Henry. I felt in control. It was apart from terrible sickness, it was a great pregnancy. Until
and then what happened?
So I started to have what I thought were Braxton Hicks contractions, which is where your kind of uterus will tighten, and they call them kind of ineffective contractions or practice contractions, but they feel very, very similar to early labour. And I remember being about 28 weeks pregnant, and I was walking around Aldi, I think, and I had one of these contractions that made me have to stop pushing the shopping trolley and kind of bend over and breathe. And I thought, I don't know if that's quite normal. And I kind of put it to the back of my head and thought, I'm 28 weeks pregnant. Everybody and their dog has told me that because Arthur came at 42 weeks, this baby will be the same. It's not going to happen any earlier. And you know, the pattern of having babies later term in pregnancy, or kind of overdue, if you will, the general pattern is that you do then carry, you know, later on with your second or any consequential pregnancies. I realised that I'd lost my mucus plug. And I was going to say apologies for any too much information, but I think anybody listening to this will not bat an eyelid to that I've just said that.
No, absolutely. Everybody who's listening to this, I'm sure will resonate with some parts of what you're saying. So please speak freely. Absolutely.
I panicked because I knew what that was. And for anybody that doesn't know, that's kind of a plug of mucus that stops your cervix from dilating, and it tends to happen just before you go into labour. So I went to my local maternity unit and was triaged, and they said, yeah, that definitely looks like that's what's going to happen, but it can regrow, and, you know, you're not in any we monitored you, you're not in any signs of labour. But I was thinking, I don't really think that that's quite right. My body doesn't feel quite right. And I didn't have that experience of going into labour with Arthur. So this was all new to me. In the early hours, 2 nights later, I woke up and my waters had gone. And I was about 30 weeks pregnant. I was just sat on the toilet thinking, this is not happening. This isn't happening. So we woke my son up and we got down to the hospital. And I was monitored, and they tested me and said, yes, your waters are going. And they kept me in hospital. I was put on a magnesium sulfate drip to prevent cerebral palsy for my baby, and given steroid injections to help mature his lungs. And they chatted to my psychiatric team. They made sure I had my own room so that I could prioritize sleep, because that was the biggest trigger for me postnatally and what caused my psychosis. And I kept saying, can I still have this section? If I go into labour, can I have this section? And they said, yes. As soon as you're in established labour, we will have no choice. Obviously, that baby's going to come, and yes, you can have your C-section. And they scanned me on that day and told me that he was in a breech position. He was feet first. So then it was very kind of like, you know, we need to keep a very close eye on you, because there's immediate risk of life if you're trying to give birth in that position. And very, very quickly, I thought, this is it. This baby's coming. I am way past 4 centimetres. And I remember an obstetrician running into the room, gowned up. They'd just been into theatre. And after reading my notes post-birth, kind of can piece all of this together, but it essentially said in my notes that heard wails of distress. She came in and checked me, and I was 10 centimetres, and Henry's feet were being born. Wow. So I was rushed into theatre with a midwife on top of me, trying to prevent Henry from coming. And they prepared me to have the spinal to deliver him as a category 2 section, emergency section, so I'd be awake. And as they cannulated me, I just said, he's coming. And thank God they did listen to me. All I remember then was everybody shouting, GA for general anaesthetic. They started to intubate me, but I was still conscious, which was probably the most traumatic thing personally, like to my body, I've ever experienced. And he was born within a minute of knife to skin. Wow. He was born blue and floppy and had to be resuscitated. And it was it was immediately apparent that there was something very wrong with him. And I remember saying to my husband, what's wrong with him? And he said, nothing, he's just premature. And I said, no, there's something wrong. And then obviously I was in and out of consciousness for a good 24 hours. And then I finally met Henry, and it was apparent that there was something very wrong with him. And they didn't know what that was, but it was to do with his skin. And the kind of 8 weeks then of intensive care and unpicking all of that and finding out what was wrong with him proceeded. It was a very hard time, and there was a mother and baby unit waiting for me. I think everybody thought, this is it, this is going to finish Emily off.
Oh, God.
And thankfully it didn't, somehow miraculously didn't.
That's pretty overwhelming for me to listen to, and I've given birth before, and mine was traumatic, but obviously nothing like that. And I think what's interesting is that there are other mothers who have experienced similar situations and feel the same way that you do, and yet we choose to do it again. I think that's the interesting kind of thing. It's and you said you don't know. Everyone thought it was going to finish you off, but it didn't. So you had some inner strength somewhere, because why? What was going through your mind?
For me, like, one of the decisions about having Henry was that I almost needed to heal that experience I had with Arthur by doing it again and proving to myself that I could do it differently. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. So I'm definitely not trying that again.
Yeah.
Because of that. I got through it because of my mum.
Okay.
I'm going to get quite emotional now. But yeah, she...
Take your time. Take your time.
I obviously had a lot of help and support from healthcare services. The nurses that looked after Henry in intensive care became like my second family. You know, had I not been able to feel like I could speak freely to them about how I was feeling, and they've heard it all, and it really helped to know that. But my mum, you know, and my husband and other family members, but I couldn't have got through that without my mum, and I couldn't have got through any of the last kind of 9 years of parenting without her. She's I call her my soulmate. She's my best friend. And I'm very, very lucky and appreciative to have a mother like her, in that I can talk to her about whatever is in my head. I know that she's not going to judge me for. We kept each other laughing throughout that whole time. And I think it was just she said to me the day Henry was born, I'm not going back to work for 6 months. I'm here with you now. And and I think that, like, oh my God, thank God.
Oh.
It was just like the relief of that.
The relief.
Yeah.
But that's such a beautiful and wonderful, I guess, experience and thing to have, you know, to know that your mum, like, I called you a fairy godmother, she was your fairy godmother, and she helped you through this whole experience and to be there for you and to give you that support. So what was it like when you got home? Explain to me the kind of scenarios and, you know, sleeping, eating, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, again, very different experiences. We didn't bring Henry home for 4 weeks after I gave birth to him. So I had time to recover and from my section and sleep. Although I was pumping milk every 2 hours for him, it was a completely different postnatal experience. You know, any new family listening to this will know it's a blur of kind of day and night, and it's relentless. And, you know, I think we need to kind of understand that babies are born without a body clock. They don't know what time it is. The hormones that they produce within that body clock aren't fully matured yet either. So they don't know the difference between day and night. And we can't expect to bring a baby home and then go to bed at 7 and not wake at 7. Night feeds are normal, and they are normal for, you know, the first 12, even 18 months of infancy, especially if breastfeeding. And, you know, that body clock starts to mature around 3 to 6 months when they start to produce their own melatonin, which is important for sleep. So, yeah, I mean, my experience was, both experiences were very different. But I think had somebody have told me those things, it would have felt a bit more manageable in that, okay, this is going to be very, very hard, and it's not going to be how the books have said it's going to be or how the films have said it's going to be. And this is why. I think my brain especially loves to know why things are hard, and that can be at my detriment. But also kind of, I was reading the other day that within 3 days after birth, your hormones return to baseline level, which is very, very fast. And it's actually the biggest hormone change in the shortest time span that any human ever experiences. Mm. So I think when we kind of spoke about preparing new mums for for birth. I think it can be, for postnatal period, it can be as simple as, on day 3, you will feel very low potentially. And that's not you're not doing anything wrong. And this is why that's happening. But perhaps if that goes on for a couple of weeks, here are some things that, or people that you can contact, like your health visitor, midwife, and GP, and those types of things. But yeah, sleep and feeding, you'll feel like all you do is sleep, feed. Get them to sleep, get them to feed, change the nappy, repeat. It's very, very relentless. So finding any kind of time for yourself where possible.
Difficult.
Not feeling guilty about not being productive. Just rest your body and hold your baby and concentrate on kind of, healing and getting to know and bond with your little one, and kind of, focus that on attachment with your baby.
I'm sure there are so many people, new mums that can relate to that, because you don't get rest, do you? You're in your PJs and your slippers and your dressing gown, and sometimes you think, God, I haven't even had a shower for like 2 days, because all I'm doing, especially when you've got 2 kids, you're like up, down, and when there's a smaller period of time ages between the two, because often people have them sort of 12 to 18 months in between each other, apart, then that's even harder, because you literally have 2 babies and all you're doing is eat, sleep, feed, washing them, but you don't have time to wash your own hair or even get dressed.
I remember a funny story. My cousin had a baby a couple of years before me, and she told me this story, and this kind of sums it up, that her and her boyfriend were obviously looking after the baby, the feeding, getting to sleep, and they were like, oh, we've not had any tea, we've not had any dinner. So he was like, okay, I'll go make us something. They sat down to eat it and checked the time, and it was 3 a.m. Oh my God. They just completely lost sense of reality and time. And I thought that was, I thought that kind of summed it up really.
I really want to ask you a question where I think we were talking about at the beginning about this fairy tale experience that we all think that we're going to have as expected mothers, or even before that. Now you've gone through all your experiences and faced all your challenges, and you see other mums or potential mums, or you might even have a conversation with a younger person, and there's this beautiful dream that's being sold to them through the kind of storybooks and whatever that we've read. It's all in our heads. How does that make you feel now, after what you've been through and seeing the beginnings of somebody who was like yourself?
If you'd have asked me this question maybe 3 years ago, I'd have said angry and sad, and almost, especially when it's portrayed on social media in a certain way, I remember like seeing people out and about with tiny babies, and I'd feel sad and angry that they seemed happy and the baby was settled and they don't look like zombies. And I'm like, how are you doing that? Why couldn't that have been me? Very much felt like that. I think now I feel like I'm much better at saying, but actually, how are you really? And I wasn't good at that before. I now look at it and think, okay, well, that's what, if it's something on social media, that's what that person wants me to see. That person they want to celebrate, and they're excited about that. And I know that behind closed doors, there'll be very many difficult moments that are probably happening now that person's not speaking about. I think because of my line of work and being in it with those families and having those honest conversations now makes me feel less alone, and it makes me feel almost normal and healed, that I'm getting the opportunity to have conversations with parents that are honest, and sharing my experience helps those people feel less alone, but they also make me feel less alone too, that I didn't go through all of that and feel that way on my own. There were hell of a lot, obviously, moments of sheer joy with both of my children in that first year, but there were also very, very low moments, and moments where I thought, I can't do this, I can't do it, and even thoughts of what on earth have I done? Why have I done this? That does not, like I said, take away from the fact that I was good enough for my boys. I kept them alive. I bonded with them. I played with them. I fed them. But you're still allowed to feel like that too sometimes. And I think you'd be lying if you have never kind of thought, oh my God, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. And I joke with my friends about that now, and I say, you know, those people that are like, parenting is the best joy of my life and I love every moment of it, and we're going to go make some homemade cookies now, and I'm like, okay, good for you. But we know like, I feel, you know, I can see humor in it now. And I know deep down that isn't always that person's reality. But I think had you asked me that question 5 years ago, I'd have been like, why can't I be that parent?
Yeah. I mean, I was actually having an argument with one of my daughters this week, and I screamed at her and went, "You don't realise how hard it is being a mum to you too." And literally, that's how you feel. I mean, I can say that now because they're 18 and 20, but there are times in our lives where in our head, that's what we're shouting. It's so frigging hard. This is so hard. And how come you're making it look so easy? Because quite clearly it's not. It's just a facade. And I guess everyone goes through those different stages, don't they, in their lives? It may not happen when they're younger, but it may happen when they're suddenly older. My youngest, and she knows I'll say this, was an absolute, apart from the reflux, she was just an angel child. And then suddenly the hormones kicked in and we called her the devil child. She's getting better now, so I can say that. But you know, everyone goes through those ups and downs. It's never plain sailing all the time. So the lady that's making the cookies for her children, I'd say watch out, because in a few years you might have the kids smashing up the cookies and throwing them around the room.
Yeah, and I think when I always wanted to know, I'd be like, does this get easier? And people would say, no. Or this bit gets easier and then something else happens. And when people ask me that now, when friends have babies now and they say, please tell me this gets easier, I say, the bit that you're in now that you're finding very, very hard will get easier, but it will be replaced by something that's just as hard, but you might not feel as emotionally and mentally drained as you do right now about that thing. You know, we all find challenges or stages of parenting easier than others. You know, personally, the newborn phase for me is the most difficult because of the hormones and the sleep deprivation and how that affects my mental health. But I know of mothers and friends that love that time, but then when they get to 18 months, they have a really hard time because they're constantly on the move and they're testing boundaries. And actually, that's the part of parenting that I enjoyed most. So, you know, everybody has different feelings about it.
I'd love to chat to you when your boys are a teenager, just so we can compare notes.
I already know it's going to be hell. I already know.
It's honestly, being a parent, and I don't care what anyone says, it is, and I, you know, and I've had various jobs. It is the hardest, and I'm still learning. And even this week, you know, I'm still making mistakes. I'm still saying things in a way that I shouldn't to get the right reaction so that they'll do things the right way. I just, it is the hardest job. And I don't think anyone should sit there and think it you know, isn't. But, you know, I'm still thinking in my mind, is it rewarding? And I do think that when we get to grandparents, my mum said something to me when I was pregnant, and in a way, I was flabbergasted that she said it to me, but now I can understand it. And she said to me when I was pregnant, you love your grandchild more than you love your child. And I was like, mortified. What do you mean you're going to love my child more than you love me? And now I understand it when I see, and also looking back with my grandparents, a grandchild and a grandmother's love, or grandpa, grandson, is just completely different, because they're not parenting those children. No. They're doing all the fun stuff and we're doing all the hard stuff.
Yeah. My mum says that very openly. Like, I would die for those children. I'd have died for you, but I would die for those children.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I remember her in the midst of Henry being very unwell when he was first born, and me and my mum had quite a bit of a tetchy moment. We were both exhausted and absolutely filled with worry. And she said, how do you think I feel? This is happening to you and to my grandchild. And I was like, Hello, come on.
Thank you so much for sharing all of your experiences today, because they really touched me, and I'm sure they're going to touch anyone that's able to listen to this podcast and this episode. And I think, going back to the topic, you know, being a mum, is it rewarding? I still challenge myself with that, because we do things because we love our children. We do things because we've got a responsibility to our children, and we're accountable for bringing them into this world. But the rewards that come back, I think, probably happen a lot later in life, maybe with you and your mum. Your mum probably feels that reward now because of your relationship together, that you've gone through all of these experiences. So I would say, I mean, I've got teens and young adults, so I'm still kind of going through different various issues with them and challenges. But I think I'm hoping in time that when I'm your mum's age, that I will have that same kind of experience with my kids.
You will, absolutely. And I think if anybody listening to this is finding parenting hard, and which we will all do, that doesn't mean you're a bad parent. It doesn't mean you don't love your child as much as the next person. It's a relentless and sometimes thankless journey. And we all worry about getting it wrong. We all do. We all worry we're not enough. And if you're worrying if you're enough, you are, because you wouldn't be worrying about it if you weren't.
It's very, very true.
And I think, you know, it doesn't, you are allowed, you are a human being. Just because you have given birth, or just because you become a dad or a mom, or in whatever capacity you are parenting, it doesn't then, that the day that starts, it doesn't mean you're not a human being anymore. You're still going to have human emotions about your children. They're going to be annoying. You're going to find them triggering. They're going to trigger things in you that you didn't know would affect you. And that's okay. You know, we have to be kinder to ourselves and know that we can find this hard, but still love the hell out of them. And that's okay.
Emily shared a lot of her trauma and her journey about wanting to be a mum, and then going through the trauma of actually having her two boys. And even after the births, which were traumatic, she still went on that motherhood journey. One of those people that Emily pointed out was her mum. And I look at my own mum at the same time. Now, mums get to be grandparents, right? So one day I'm going to be a grandparent. So I think the one thing that I can take from this is, I think I'm going to feel rewarded when I'm a grandma. So I will be a mum. I'm still a mum, but I'm going to be a grandma. So I'm going to be able to help my daughter and help her children. So is motherhood rewarding? Yes, it is. I just think we have to go through that journey, through those years, and know at the end of it all, it's going to be worth it. Guys, if you've liked what you've heard today, we would really appreciate it if you could subscribe, if you can leave us a review, and obviously rate us. If we know that you like what we're doing, we will continue to do these kinds of episodes. If there's any topics that you like, you can email us at therealstoriespodcast@gmail.com. That's therealstoriespodcast@gmail.com. And then I will see you next week for my next episode of Real Women's Stories with me, Lisa Quait.